The statues of Alexandria are a restless lot. They are usually commissioned to stand in a certain spot, and then, after a few centuries, or perhaps the odd decade, these monuments are unbolted, dismantled, and hidden away where no one can see them, only for them to pop back out again, erected at a brand new site. This phenomenon is particularly Alexandrian. Elsewhere, if a statue is taken down, it is then melted down and sold for the metal value. It is made to disappear definitively. In Alexandria, there is a gentler fate, and one fine day, without fanfare or explanation, statues that disappeared over half a century before can suddenly reappear. Statues move, and obelisks too, and it all began a long time ago. In 270 BC, Ptolemy II built a funerary temple in honour of his deceased wife Arsinoe II. An obelisk borrowed from the sanctuary of Heliopolis stood at its entrance. And there it stood, in front of the Arsinoion for 3 centuries. The obelisk was then shifted a few hundred metres towards one of Alexandria's agoras. And then Caligula had it transported to Rome, where it was erected in the centre of the Circus Vaticanus. The Apostle Peter was crucified upside down at the foot of this obelisk, just a few metres away from the present-day basilica. Finally, in 1586, Pope Sixtus V had it take a last little trip to St. Peter's Square. One Domenico Fontana of the Masons Guild constructed a machine capable of moving and re-erecting the obelisk in the square. This monolith is over 25 metres high and weighing more than 750 tonne, still stands there today. The Metropole Hotel at Alexandria. Do the guests know that they're sleeping in a room where, until the 19th century, a pair of pharaonic obelisks once stood, marking the entrance to the Caesareum, the most beautiful temple of the city? 14 centuries ago, the pharaoh Thutmose III erected 2 obelisks made of Aswan granite in the great sanctuary of the sun god at Heliopolis, near modern Cairo. In the year 13 BC, Augustus had them brought to Alexandria to decorate the entrance to the Caesareum, a temple dedicated to the imperial cult. An inscription engraved into a bronze crab, one of 4 wedged as supports beneath the obelisk, tells the tale. In the 8th year of Caesar, Barbarus, prefect of Egypt, erected this, Pontius being the architect. These 2 obelisks, nicknamed Cleopatra's Needles by travellers, would be admired, described, sketched and photographed until the end of the 19th century. Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt, had offered one of them to Great Britain in 1817. Some 60 years later, the British asked the Khedive Ismail for confirmation of this gift, and, to save money, they chose the obelisk that had been knocked down during an earthquake in the Middle Ages. Slotted into a specially constructed steel sheath, it was towed by a ship towards London. However, it broke free during a storm in the Bay of Biscay. Recovered and secured by another British vessel sailing in the vicinity, it finally reached London in January 1878. It stands in the capital of Great Britain. One can still admire the obelisk guarded by bronze sphinxes on the embankment of the River Thames. Two years later, in 1879, the Americans followed the British example and claimed their obelisk. Despite the opposition of both Egyptians and Americans to the notion of depriving Alexandria of one of its last ancient landmarks, a remarkable steel structure was conceived to lower the obelisk. It was then transported to the Western Harbour. A certain Captain Henry Goring cut an opening in the hull of his ship and slid the obelisk inside by rolling it on a slight incline upon old cannonballs. The voyage across the ocean was smooth. Once in New York, the ship had to be put into dry dock, the hull cut open again, and the monolith slid out to be dragged across town to Central Park, where it was rather spectacularly erected by means of a swinging steel gantry. One can now admire it amongst the greenery opposite the Metropolitan Museum. A long journey for these two obelisks, from the quarries of Aswan to the banks of the Thames and the heart of New York, with a halt of 14 centuries at Heliopolis and another 19 in Alexandria. The Pharos, or Lighthouse of Alexandria, often featured on coins. Its construction was commissioned in 297 BC by Ptolemy I, and it took 14 years to build. 6 colossal statues stood on the esplanade of the monument. One couple is remarkable for its astounding height. These two monolithic statues, carved from blocks of red granite from the quarries of Aswan, are more than 10 meters tall. They were discovered underwater on the sunken site of the Pharos, which was itself finally destroyed by an earthquake in 1303. Were their bases some 2.6 meters high, altogether each colossus weighed over 36 tons. Berenice I was raised from the waters of the Mediterranean by the Egyptian Navy in November 1962 at the instigation of the man who found her, Kamal Abu al-Sadat, the pioneer of underwater archaeology in Egypt. She appears with all the features of the goddess Isis, wearing the crown of Hathor. She was first placed within the sanctuary of Serapis, at the foot of Pompey's Pillar. And then, at the beginning of the 1980s, she was transported to the lawn of the Maritime Museum, where she remains today. But she does not have all her belongings. Her crown is exhibited in the open-air museum next to the Roman theatre, while her base still lies underwater. Scarcely risen from the waters of Alexandria's bay, Ptolemy I was taken to the laboratory at the Roman theatre to be cleaned of his crust of seashells. In 1998, the statue was sent to France and stood in front of the Petit Palais as part of the events that marked the year France-Égypte. The exhibition La Gloire d'Alexandrie would attract more than 200,000 visitors. Ptolemy then continued his travels to the Musée de l'Ephèbe in Cap d'Agde, in the south of France, before returning to Paris to catch a plane back home to Alexandria. Today, the builder of the ancient library stands proudly by the entrance to the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina. He is not represented as a Greek king, but as master of all Egypt, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. As for his base, it's to be found next to his wife in the Maritime Museum. During the 18th and 19th centuries, several travellers described the remains of an ancient portico and of colossal statues in grey granite by the shores of Lake Hadra. This would have been about 20 minutes to the east of Alexandria, moving at donkey's pace. One of the plates from a work published in 1842 by the famous German Egyptologist Karl Richard Lepsius shows two colossal heads. These are of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He is presented as Pharaoh, she as Isis, and they are holding hands. The Belgian Egyptologist Pierre Gilbert has worked on a reconstitution of the couple. In 1907, Mark Antony was moved to the garden of the Greco-Roman Museum. But this museum was closed in 2005 for renovation, and so he crossed Alexandria again to lie in the archaeological site of Comusha Afa. As for Cleopatra, she travelled further. Daninos Pasha, an excavator and trader in antiquities, sold her in 1911 to a Belgian industrialist, Raoul Warocki. He installed her in his chateau at Marimont, which is now a museum, where Cleopatra can be admired today. More than 3,000 kilometres now separate the unfortunate couple. In 2004, archaeological excavations were conducted at the place indicated by the travellers. The remains of two porticos were unearthed, with the granite columns mentioned in 1743. Today, however, modern buildings have covered the site forever. There are also statues that move on their own. Such a one was Serapis. A short time before his sanctuary was destroyed by the Christians, an iron statue of the sun on its chariot was suspended in mid-air and moved by itself to join the statue of the bearded god, giving him a kiss and recharging him with solar energy. The faithful believed it was a miracle. It was Ptolemy I who introduced the cult of this divinity, Serapis, by bringing a statue from the town of Sinope on the shores of the Black Sea. The cult of this god was to enjoy a huge success. Temples to Serapis were built all around the Mediterranean. In Alexandria, the sanctuary of Serapis, the Serapeion, became the most important of the city. At the top of a flight of 100 steps, it dominated the town, sitting on a line with the Heptastadion, the causeway that ran out to the island of Pharos. His cult would last until the banning of polytheism in 391 AD. Likewise, in the funerary temple of Arsinoe II, her husband and brother Ptolemy II planned to install a statue of the deceased queen beneath the dome, floating with no apparent support in midair. These two astonishing phenomena demonstrate the mastery of Alexandrian engineers in the use and manipulation of naturally magnetic stones that could be found in the desert. Towards the end of the 19th century, new statues would be commissioned from Egyptian, Greek, Italian and French artists. The animal sculptor Henri Jacquemart created a number of masterpieces in Paris. Griffins in the Place Saint-Michel, a rhinoceros at the entrance to the Musée d'Orsay, sphinxes for the Palmier Fountain at Châtelet, lions for the Château d'Eau fountain at Place Félix Éboué, another lion in the Jardin des Plantes, and many others. Khedive Ismail commissioned him to make a bronze of his grandfather, Muhammad Ali, the founder of the modern Egyptian royal family. The piece was exhibited in the Salon de Paris of 1872 and was well received. The statue was erected at Alexandria in the Place des Consuls, appropriately rebaptized for the occasion Place Muhammad Ali. It is the statue of a man, imperturbable, defiant in the face of adversity. And yet when the statue was erected there were demonstrations. A fatwa had been issued against this representation of the human form. In 1882, the bombardment of Alexandria by the British destroyed almost all the buildings in the vicinity, but, astonishingly, the statue was unharmed and remains today an unchanging landmark for all Alexandrians. Originally, it was to have been guarded by 4 larger-than-life lions, also sculpted by Jacquemart. The engineer, Linan de Belfond, had them sent to Cairo in order to decorate the Kasr Nil Bridge over the Nile, where they still sit today. In 1931, however, the bridge was widened. It was not suitable for motor traffic. The lions were sent to the Giza Zoo and spent more than 2 years there before returning to their places on either side of the Nile. In the Greek Quarter, Ptolemy's Street opens to the north onto Nubar Pasha Gardens. Nubar, an ethnic Armenian and former prime minister under the Khedives Ismail, Tawfiq and Abbas II, died in Paris in 1899, and a public subscription led to the erection of a bronze statue of the man, created by the celebrated portraitist Denis Puech. The statue of Mariette, today in the garden of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, is just one of the numerous statues and busts of the famous artists and politicians that Denis Puech created in his Parisian studio. The sculptor was also the author of a long series of war memorials in France after 1918. A museum is dedicated to him in the town of Rodez. Come the revolution of 1952, and Nubar is replaced by a cement copy of The Secret Keeper by the Egyptian sculptor Mahmoud Mokhtar. As for Nubar, he was transferred to the backyard of Alexandria's Fine Arts Museum. Fearing that the statue might be melted down, the head of the Armenian community tried to buy it, but in vain. Half a century later, without any explanation, the statue of Nubar suddenly reappeared, but not on its original base. It was erected in the courtyard of Alexandria's Opera House and can be admired there today. Nubar is wearing a fez, so typical of Egyptian civil servants. The books under his chair recall the important role he played in the establishment of the mixed tribunals. The statue is engraved with a sentence in French, inspired by the words of Aristotle. La justice est la base de tout gouvernement. Puech sculpted another representation of Nubar, this time in high relief on white marble. Within a pink granite setting in the form of a pharaonic temple, it can be seen today in the grounds of the Armenian Community Organization of Alexandria. It is one of a group of tombs of famous Armenians, including Bogos Bey, a relative of Nubar and a minister under Muhammad Ali. Saad Zaghloul is a hero of the nationalist struggle against the British, who occupied Egypt from 1882. In 1919, he founded the Waft Party and led demonstrations that resulted in his exile first to Malta and then to the Seychelles. He managed to return in 1923 and became, 1 year later, Prime Minister and then President of the Parliament, but died in 1927, aged 68. A bronze statue of this leader was made by the sculptor Mahmoud Mokhtar, who is well known for many masterpieces, including his composition Nahdat Masr, or Egypt Awakening, that stands near Cairo University. Some are exhibited in the museum of his name at Gezira. At the age of 20, Mokhtar won a prize that allowed him to travel to Paris to perfect his talents as a sculptor. There, he met Saad Zaghloul in 1919 and joined the Waft Party. Nationalism and idealism inspired his creations. It was in his Paris studio that he worked on the larger-life statue of Saad Zaghloul. The great man's widow, Safia Zaghloul, visited the studio in 1930. The statue was cast to be erected in Alexandria, facing the sea, a symbol of Egypt's openness to the Mediterranean, while in Cairo he faces Qasr el-Nil Bridge, the symbol of revolutions to come. In 1927, the Italian community of Alexandria raised money towards the construction of a monument to be set at one end of the French Gardens, overlooking the sea and just next to the French consulate building. The community called upon a well-known Italian architect resident in Egypt, Ernesto Verrucci, who was chief architect of the royal palaces. He designed a semicircular colonnade built of white travertine stone imported from Italy that would serve to frame a bronze statue of Khedive Ismail, sculpted by the highly regarded artist Pietro Canonica. His numerous portraits of different rulers are exhibited in Rome, in the Canonica Museum, and in other countries, such as Turkey. In Istanbul, a monument in Taksim Square represents Ataturk and his comrades. At Izmir, an equestrian statue looks out to the Mediterranean. The inauguration of the statue of Khedive Ismail on 2nd December 1938 in the presence of King Farouk also saw a fascist demonstration led by the black shirts of the Italian community. After the revolution of 1952, the monument became the tomb of the unknown sailor. The statue was taken down and disappeared from view. In the early 2000s, the statue reappeared all of a sudden, but not at its original site, but mounted on a high base shaped like a truncated pyramid on Safia Zaghloul Street, in front of the archaeological site of Komendika. Alexander the Great is, of course, the patron of the city which he created out of nothing and to which he gave his name. Apart from a few small portraits held in the Greco-Roman Museum, no ancient representation of Alexandria has survived in the town. In 2002, the Greek community of Alexandria decided to offer a bronze statue to the city. It is the work of the artist Konstantinos Palaiologos.
Η τιμή που μου έγινε να φιλοτεχνήσω τον έφυπο Ανδριάντα του Μεγάλου Αλεξάνδρου, του στρατηλάτη των στρατηλατών όλων των εποχών, για μένα είναι το ωραιότερο δώρο της ζωής μου. Σας ευχαριστώ.
The statue was cast in Athens and then caught a boat from Piraeus across the sea to Alexandria. Accompanied by an enthusiastic crowd, by Greek and Egyptian officials, and by local Greeks in traditional costume, it was transported with great pomp to its final emplacement. The statue now stands near the flower clock on Heraea Street, looking towards the entrance to the city, the Platea, the principal east-west thoroughfare of ancient Alexandria, and now the modern Fouad Street. The founder of the city, armoured and astride Bucephalus, holds out a small statue of Nike, victory. The ensemble symbolises peace after war, the arrival of Alexander at peace and ready to build a new capital of Egypt. As part of an exhibition organised in 2007 on the esplanade of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, local artists presented works inspired by the leading figures of Alexandrian science. There was Euclid, and Manathon, and Hypatia, represented holding the folds of her gown wide open. The statue of Hypatia was created by Tariq al-Kumi.
هو كان في فترة المكتبة عاملة أسبوع ورك شوب لمجموعة من الفنانين المصريين في مركز تجميل المدينة، وحبوا إن احنا نعمل الدورة دي شخصيات من الإسكندرية. فطبعا ادونا مجموعة شخصيات. أنا قريت عن هيباتيا، كنت طبعا أعرف قصة هيباتيا، فتفاعلت معاه وتأثرت فعلا بالشخصية وتخيلت فعلا حياتها كانت عايشة ازاي، وازاي انها كانت بتقوم بدور تنويري، وان المجتمع في الوقت ده ما قدرش انه يتمن رؤيتها ونظرتها وتحليلها للاوضاع سواء الاجتماعية او الدينية، وتم اضطهادها ولاقت من الاغتراب في وطنها ومن النقد. وكان بيبقى في الحالة دي افتكرت صراعات حالية بين الجهل والظلام والنور. ففعلا تأثرت بيها. حبيت ان انا اخلدها بشكل مش واقعي. اخدت فعلا المعاناة عملتها لهيئة الشخصية اللي هي بتصعد للسماء في حالة من السمو والشموخ.
Hypatia was born in Alexandria around 370 AD. She was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and director of Alexandria's ancient library. In one of the auditoria of the town, she gave lectures on science and philosophy. According to ancient writers, she attracted an almost uncountable number of people who rushed to hear her speak. It was a troubled time, and the Christians had been persecuted until the beginning of the 4th century AD. And then, in 391, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And 2 years later, the pagan gods were officially banished from Alexandria. The main polytheistic sanctuary of the city, the Serapeon, was destroyed. In 415, Hypatia, a symbol of pagan science, was attacked in broad daylight, stripped of her academic gown, and assassinated by Christian monks. When the exhibition on the Esplanade is closed, the statue of Hypatia will welcome visitors at the entrance to the Biblioteca. The other statues will be erected in different cultural centres of the city. This seemingly perpetual motion reflects the ideologies of the moment. By borrowing statues and obelisks from the pharaonic sanctuary at Heliopolis, the Ptolemies wanted to give their capital a venerable air and anchor it to the history of Egypt. In turn, Europeans and Americans hoped to add a historical depth to their capitals by wrapping them up in Egyptian decor. For the statues that stayed in Alexandria, ideology was also at play. Those that recalled the old regime of viceroys and khedives were brusquely toppled from their pedestals to be hidden in a cupboard and replaced by works that conformed to the artistic dogma of the revolution. Their recent return might be seen as Egypt accepting and embracing its long history, and also showing respect to the beauty of these masterpieces, created by some of the best sculptors of both Egypt and Europe.